Alright, so hey everyone. Today I want to take a look at the dead zones for the Doom 3 games. So that'll include the original Xbox version, which you're seeing on screen, the Xbox 360 version of the BFG edition, as well as the original PC version of the BFG edition, and finally the recent re-release of the BFG edition for the modern console, specifically the Xbox One. So jumping into the original Xbox's Deadzones, we have here right now about 27% square dead zone. In like square or axial dead zones, this restricts diagonal movement around the axes, the amount of which is the size of the dead zone. So about 27% around, in this case, the vertical axis is moving perfectly left. There's no vertical movement at all. In this case, we're moving perfectly right, perfectly up, and perfectly down. You only start seeing diagonal movement until you break out of both axial dead zones. So you can see if I flatten out the view a bit, moving perfectly left, and then perfectly, or not perfectly up, but slightly diagonally upward. Perfectly left, now slightly diagonally downward. The interesting part about this dead zone is that vertically there's a gap where diagonal movement exists. So you can see here that I'm moving diagonally, and it's got kind of a rounded shape on the closer to the dead zone. Further from the dead zone, you just have a flat threshold. I have no idea how this would be set up or why it would be set up this way, but during normal gameplay, this isn't really noticeable at all compared to just normal axial dead zone. Movement is about a 20% dead zone. And we have the same kind of restriction around the axes, just less because the dead zone size is smaller. But I wasn't able to notice any of the similar gap in angular restriction. To look at the movement restriction, if we align ourselves to this portion of the wall, you can see that I'm pointing pretty rightward, but I'm within the axial dead zone, so I'm pretty well aligned with it. But once I break out of it, you can see I deviate, and I probably didn't even need a reference because this is pretty abrupt. Now, something I need to mention is that the dead zones you see here aren't the dead zones that seem to appear when first launching the game. When first launching the game, it seems that both the movement and the camera dead zones are 25% axial dead zones, and the curved region, restricted region for the camera expands as well. As you play, it seems to migrate, seems to shrink into these two sizes and doesn't seem to get smaller from here. So that's unreliable since it changes during gameplay. So what you see here is probably what will happen after a few minutes of playing, but when you start the game, the dead zones will be significantly larger. It is a little unfortunate here that the movement dead zone shrinks to a smaller dead zone than the camera, because you would need more precision for aiming than just for moving, but that is what it is. For the acceleration curve, the curve starts faster than 0%, and this appears to be because the dead zone is cropping into the curve, and you can see that it's some kind of exponential. It's not a power function, but it starts slowly and then builds up to its maximum turn speed. It being cropped it is made more clear when testing while the dead zone is at 35%, because it's the same curve, it's just cropped at a further amount. Now, I can't tell for sure. This curve seems like it might be axial rather than magnitude based, meaning it's based off the each the horizontal and the vertical axis separately rather than from the center. And I say that because at least when using an anti-deadzone to counter this, the angles feel a little off, like they're kind of you're sticking to the axes, which is a common portion of the common aspect of axial-based curves. That could not be the case, but either way, given the size of these axial deadzones, the axial deadzones will be the bigger issue there. And given the general pace of this game, that's not a huge issue, but still one to think about. Now I'm playing at the maximum sensitivity, which you can see here. It's pretty brisk, but it's also kind of slow compared to many other games' maximums. So this is about 295 degrees per second as far as I've tested. And this can actually be increased. It can take a bit to load. So you can see maximum sensitivity. And one thing to mention here is these values are accurate. So when you set them the same, they are the same. Some games have the vertical sensitivity weighted lower, so even if you have them the same, vertical slower, that's not the case here. But anyway, so you can turn on sprint look, and while you're sprinting, this will increase your look speed. And sprinting in this game is a hold. So you can see here, this is your normal maximum, but when I pull the trigger to sprint, oops, that's silly. Okay, it's dumb. Let's just forget I did that, because you have to accept it. Alright, so maximum turn speed, then when you sprint, significantly faster. So this speed is about 515 degrees per second at its maximum. But this scales all throughout the sensitivities and the curve value, so you can see that I'm not sprinting right now, but when I press it, you can see that it's sped up. And if I go even slower, then sprint, see it's sped up there too. So it's just a flat multiplier for this. It's almost like a reverse ADS sensitivity drop. Personally, I find this a little kind of awkward, but the Deadzone already affects precision significantly. But going towards that, there is an option for aim assist. And what aim assist seems to do in this game is to, one, it has the normal function of slowing your sensitivity while close to a target. But much more importantly is once you're on that target and press or hold the fire button, you stay locked on that target until they die or get too close and go completely out of range. So it's basically a complete aimbot once you're on target. And then they also want to talk about is you have a crouch option to toggle or hold that. And for your button layout, you do have 3 options, and they're not anything groundbreaking. But this game does let you customize some hotkeys for weapons on your D-pad, and you can customize them with all the weapons you have here. So that's pretty neat. The last thing I want to really cover is for movement. You have a pretty smooth gradient from your slowest movement speeds to your fastest movement speeds. And while sprinting, this is just a modifier for that. So you can see that I'm moving fully, and if I sprint, you start sprinting, and your full speed. And you can see that the stamina gauge is depleted while you're sprinting. But when you're sprinting, this is just a multiplier for your speed. So similar to the sprint look, if I start sprinting, you can see that I'm moving faster. But if you pay attention to the stamina gauge, it's hasn't moved, because it only starts losing stamina when you're moving faster than your normal walking speed. And this is kind of proportional to how much faster you're moving. So you can essentially move at speeds that have you break even, so that you actually don't, you're moving faster than normal, but the regen is completely keeping pace with how much you're losing. And this seems like kind of trivial, but it's you'll see why when I compare the, I'm looking at this when comparing to the BFG edition. And this also seems to be based on, you know, just how fast you're moving in general. So if you try and sprint into the wall, you're just not going to lose any stamina for that. And again, that'll be made obvious when looking at the BFG editions. Which, that about covers it for the original Doom 3. So we have mostly axial dead zones and kind of a weird restriction here, but this should be the only game that actually can change dead zones. So when you start playing the game, the dead zones will actually be made smaller. It'll be kind of rough, well, pretty rough when you, really rough when you start playing the game, and then get to a, at least a normal axial dead zone over time. This is a very large dead zone for the camera, but was very common for the time. But anyway, to the Xbox 360 version of the BFG edition. Alright, so for the BFG version on the 360, we have a kind of an interesting axial dead zone shape. So it's mostly square, about 20%. But in the corners, we have these little notches where movement occurs a little before expected. And we see similar restricted diagonal movement, but this is reduced. So in this middle area, it's a little less than the dead zone size itself, but then it flares out near the end and restricts about as much as we'd expect from a normal axial dead zone. So you can see that moving perfectly left here, and then you can see diagonal movement begin as I break out of this. And to make this more obvious, looking up and down to better show this threshold. Movement is identical. I think it's just like a % larger, but you can see movement's occurring, and especially with the aliasing, you can see that pretty clearly. And like what I did before, let's walk up to this, use a reference, and moving back. Once I here, you can see the diagonal movement is occurring. So you can see that there's some restricted diagonal movement right in these corner regions, and this is pretty interesting because the more horizontal section of this little triangle moves you vertically, and the more vertical one moves you perfectly horizontally. So you can see me just wobbling between them. This isn't something that you'd really notice during gameplay, except occasionally when making very minor adjustments. You probably feel that little jitter if you're making like diagonal adjustments, like what I'm trying to notice right here. So it's like kind of wobbling. So this is very strange. It's a strange dead zone shape, and it seems to be part of id 5 that's made it into like every id 5 game that I'm aware of. So of course this game, but Rage 1, this is present in there, as well as Wolfenstein: The New Order, and I think Old Blood as well. And it's a larger dead zone, but it's the same shape. The Evil Within, the first Evil Within, uses this. So pretty much anything on the id 5 uses this. You can see these lines here around in the diagonals, and looking at those, I'm going to reduce the sensitivity. Similar to the Xbox version, these the horizontal and vertical sensitivity seems to be the same, so that's good there. But lowering the sensitivity to show this, it seems like if you're on one side of this, you move faster towards the opposing one. So I'm in this horizontal range, and I'm moving more vertically, but as soon as I move into the more vertical range, I move faster horizontally. So you can kind of see that pivot occurring, and it happens more clearly on some stick angles than others, or some magnitudes. You can see that pivot a little more clearly when I push it further out. So this is strange and can feel kind of inconsistent. It seems, tied to these little corners. So this can make aiming feel a little weird. Like it probably won't, dramatically change things, but just you're trying to move more diagonally, having that kind of fluctuation is a little inconsistent. Another thing that's changed here is aim smoothing has been added. So for those unaware, smoothing is where your turn speed builds up over time rather than starts at it. So if, without smoothing, if you push the stick fully, you'd get your maximum turn speed instantly. But smoothing makes it so that if you do that, it starts slower and then builds up faster. So if you make very fast movements, you actually, like this is actually much smaller movements than you'd see without smoothing. So normally you'd see like larger circles being made, but because smoothing is starting the speed off slower, these movements are reduced. Smoothing can make aiming feel more sluggish because it takes longer to build up speed over time, and this can have an impact on tracking because your turn speed's in flux, so it's hard to predict what your cursor is going to do. In Doom 3, that's not a huge issue because you don't have to track too many enemies, but it is something that can be an issue and make things more sluggish. Just to compare the sensitivities, here the sensitivity is maximum, and it was about 295 degrees in the Xbox port of Doom 3. Here it's about 400 degrees, and so this is faster than what's default there, but slower than what was there plus the sprint look, which isn't present in this game. For the acceleration curve, we can see that it also starts slightly faster than 0, and actually increases a bit slower than the Xbox's version, but then builds up faster towards the end, stick movement. It's a little too difficult to tell if this is based per magnitude or per axis. I'd wager it's per magnitude, but given the kind of weird diagonal shifting, it's hard to gauge if the angles are affected by this or not. To compare what I did before, oops, what am I looking for? Controller layout. So here we actually have less customization than the original Xbox version. We literally just jump and use get swapped. But that's largely whatever. What's really lost from the Xbox version is the ability to bind specific weapons to the D-pad. Here they're pre-mapped, so there are important ones like your melee weapons, your special weapons like the Soul Cube and the Artifact, as well as grenades, but you don't get to choose those, which can be kind of a bummer. And to compare what changed with the sprint function, so similarly, you have for movement a smooth gradient between your slowest possible speeds up to your normal walking speed. And sprint still functions as a modifier, so if you're sprinting, I'm sprinting right now, moving up to its full speed, that's nice and smooth too. So you have a full gradient of speed. But what I gave the original Xbox version props for was, if you just saw right there, if you're moving slow and sprint, so I'm sprinting right now, you can see that the stamina is being depleted at its full rate, even though I'm moving well below your normal walking speed. And if you try sprinting into a wall where you're not moving at all, you will lose stamina at its full rate. So in normal gameplay, this is trivial, like most players are going to just be sprinting at full movement anyway. Oops. But that was a cool implementation that the original Xbox had that is just non-existent here. So I think that about covers this game. So now let's jump over to the BFG edition, the original BFG edition on PC. Alright, moving on to the PC version of the original BFG edition. Before I get started, it's important to note that this version got an update or two that the console versions never did. So maybe these would have made it to the console, but these two options are what we're really looking into now. I don't know what the defaults are, so we're just going to start with them disabled. But the merge threshold is a dead zone option, and the look acceleration is a curve option. So starting with merge threshold disabled, for both dead zones, we have a 20% axial dead zone. And the expected restriction, so 20% around each axis is restricted. So in this case, I'm moving perfectly left. And then if I break out of this, I move slightly upward and downward. And this is more obvious when capping the view like this, where you can see when this diagonal movement begins. I'm going to skip over the movement dead zone for right now. When we enable the merge threshold, this actually changes the square dead zone into a circular dead zone. Oops. So this is still the same size, still 20%. Now perfectly circular. And there is no restricted movement, so moving right around the axis sees you flip vertically, so I'm moving slightly upward, slightly downward, and again looking straight up or down. It's very obvious right here. So for movement, I'm going to just take a look at the angular movement. You start moving very slow, but you can see that if I'm moving just to the right, I'm already deviating left, deviating that way. So you have full diagonal movement for both sticks with the merge threshold enabled. The look acceleration disabled. This gives you a linear curve by default, and it increases linearly. This is scaled perfectly to the dead zone. And when you enable this, this gives you a quadratic curve. So it starts much slower than linear, then increasingly builds up faster until it reaches the same maximum turn rate. So these together are already a huge leap over the previous two Doom 3 versions. We have option for perfectly circular dead zones, as well as at least crude curve customization. I'm always a slider person for curves, so I think it would be better to have a slider, so you can smoothly go between a linear curve to a quadratic to even further cubic, but any curve customization is better than none. This also doesn't seem to have any aim smoothing, at least none that I can notice, so this makes this feel quite a bit more responsive than the 360 BFG edition. One step back is the vertical sensitivity. So the horizontal sensitivity is exactly the same as on console. So at maximum, this is 400 degrees per second, and at minimum, it's 100 degrees per second. But the vertical sensitivity seemed to match that on the 360 version of the BFG edition. But here, the maximum sensitivity, you have to take these tests with a grain of salt, because testing vertical sensitivity is a little dubious. But the maximum I got here is about 250 degrees per second, and the minimum is about 60 degrees per second. So this has been reduced, and while many players like having lower vertical sensitivity, there's a few issues with it. The main one being it changes your diagonal movement. So if you move at a direction with lower, the angles will be biased towards the more sensitive axis. So I'm just using this door as a relatively square opening. So if I move at a 45-degree angle, you can see that it's not quite reaching the corner. This isn't a perfectly square door, but and that's part of it. And to use an extreme example, if we reduce this, you can see this more clearly. So if I make the same movements, you can see how flat it is now. So the larger this ratio is, the more incorrect your angles are. And again, some players prefer this, but the option should be correct, because if the options were exactly the same, the players could still control this to get the ratio they want. If you want a 1-to-1 ratio, unfortunately now you have to lower the horizontal sensitivity to be at about 250 degrees per second to be able to match that. So you have to limit yourself to be able to access a 1-to-1 ratio. Or if you prefer playing at high sensitivities, you just have to deal with it. So this is a step back, and unfortunate for that. Now back to one of the good things is there's no controller presets in this game. The customization has been fused with the mouse and keyboard keybinds, so you actually have full button customization. So you can see here are the D-pad options that were just presets for the console version, but you can now recustomize everything. So this is actually a significant improvement. Overall, this is a significant improvement over the previous Doom 3 versions. We have the ability to use perfectly circular dead zones, some light curve customization, and have full button customization on this version. And specifically when rebinding controls, some players for the console BFG edition complained that you had to hold the stick to sprint and to crouch, and that could be kind of cumbersome. But and for crouching, like this is the right stick you have to hold in to crouch. It's kind of difficult to aim if you're, say, ducking a tentacle from a commando. It's hard to duck and aim at the same time. You can customize this freely to something more comfortable to hold. The last thing to be consistent is this has the same movement speed gradient that the other ones have. They start moving very slow in this. There's probably a curve applied here as well. And this applies when you're sprinting, but similar to the console BFG edition, you still lose stamina at the full rate, no matter how fast you're going. So that's something that the original Xbox still has over this version. But now, moving on to the most recent Doom 3 edition, the one for the Xbox One. Alright, so we're on the 2019 re-release of the BFG edition for the Xbox One, and this is basically the PC version with less options. So we have the 20% circular dead zones from it. And full diagonal movement. And this is much more obvious when looking straight up or down. I'm going to skip movement for this. The acceleration curve is quadratic. So starting out slow and then builds up increasingly rapidly until its maximum turn rate. And when I mean less options, we don't have the merge threshold or the look acceleration option. So losing square dead zone isn't a big deal, but we don't have an option for the for a linear curve. The vertical sensitivity issue is the exact same as it was on PC, same exact numbers. The controller layout, we went from the PC with having full button customization back to the console version, just having this exciting swap between two buttons. So the only thing that really changed with this version is that the sprinting and crouching have been given toggles. So once you toggle it, you don't have to, you're not seeing me click these things, but you only have to click these things once, and that can be convenient, like if you're trying to duck and aim at the commando, you don't have to hold the stick, which can be kind of cumbersome. There is a bug with this, however, where sprinting is toggleable for the vast majority of the game, except for hell sections, or sections where you have unlimited stamina. For some reason, those you have to hold the stick, so that's very strange. And the other thing I've noticed is that for these computer terminals, aim assist has been added. This was actually present in the original Xbox version, but as you pass over this, the sensitivity drops, and it isn't until your weapon raises back up where your normal sensitivity returns. This did not occur in the previous BFG edition versions, and this is not affected by the aim assist options. And what can make this obnoxious is there's this delay, so you can see just how long it can take before your normal sensitivity comes back. On the original Xbox, once you got off the computer, it would immediately disable, so the window was only as big as whatever the terminal was, whereas here it's whatever the delay is. So this is a really petty issue, but if you're using this, you can basically turn around before your normal sensitivity returns. And again, petty, but something that's unfortunate you can't disable. I think it'd make perfect sense to have this tied to aim assist, where if you have it on, that triggers. If you disable it, that disables. So overall, I think this is definitely the best controlling of the console versions of Doom 3, but it's unfortunate that the best overall gamepad support is on PC and not on console. So yeah, that about covers it as far as the core controls. I don't expect this version to be updated, but I can hope. And next year is Doom 3's 20th anniversary, so it'd be cool to see an update for this version, not specifically for the controls, but just in general, because I haven't talked on it, but for those unaware, the BFG edition made some significant changes to the vanilla Doom 3 experience, and many players have issues with that. So just a few of the issues players have is the shoulder-mounted flashlight. In the original one, you had to switch to a flashlight, so you couldn't use a weapon and your flashlight at the same time. Another thing is increased ammo. If you've been paying attention to my ammo counter on the original Xbox version, I had like 7 shells. Here I have well over 150, and it's not quite that dramatic because the Xbox version has truncated levels. There's less ammo stashes, but it is dramatically, you're kind of swimming in ammo in the BFG edition. There's some changed lighting, so this area specifically isn't much different between the versions, but some areas do have additional light sources that can over-brighten them. And one of the issues I have specifically with BFG edition, at least the unmodded BFG edition, is that your muzzle flashes don't illuminate the environment. You can see that it's lighting up the gun, but not the environment, which it did in the original version. So even if you wanted to say honor code disabling your flashlight during combat, you just can't see. Like it's kind of a huge bummer that that's the case. So there are basically 10 years of complaints about the changes in the BFG edition that could be improved upon in a future update, and consoles really have no other option but the BFG edition. If you have an original Xbox, you can use the you can play the original Xbox version, or even a 360. You can play the original Xbox version of Doom 3, but that version has heavily truncated levels, and some levels just don't exist because that's what they had to do to get it to run there. So there's a very real opportunity to improve the BFG edition to be able to accommodate both, be able to let players have access to the original Doom 3 experience. Maybe you can start up a new game with the reduced ammo counts, the reduced lighting, and with the classic flashlight, so that you can play classic or the BFG version. And even with additional improvements, like the original Xbox version has a full level select, which isn't in any other version. And maybe you could have a sort of master level campaign, to use Doom Eternal's terminology, where you just put more enemies in each level to make use of the added ammunition from the BFG edition. I think there's a lot of ways that you could make these modern versions of Doom 3 into the actual best version of Doom 3 by just having additional options and fixing some of the changes that were made. And in doing so, making improvements to the gamepad controls. So fixing the vertical sensitivity, adding full button customization, and even additional options like the Deadzone size, the acceleration curve, and even toggles for certain options, depending on how players may want to bind things. If they have full button customization, it may be better to them to be a toggle or a hold input. One issue I've had with the BFG edition is that this uses cycling between weapons, and your only hotkeys were the D-pad. This made sense in the Xbox version, but weapon wheels were already pretty common by the time of the BFG edition, and Rage specifically had already used Rate of Wheel, so its software was already using them, but Doom 3 was passed up on that. And I think that would have made the controls quite a bit better to have a rated wheel, and that would free up a few other buttons. For example, I've created a mock-up layout for a wheel version, and as well as a wheel overlay to show that you can fit 8 to 12, or I mean, well, you could fit 12, but 8 to 9 weapons on an 8-way wheel very comfortably, and the remaining weapons could just use, you could have your melee weapons on the B button and the soul cube or artifact up on the D-pad, and you have a nice comfortable 8-way wheel. And to swap between shotguns, you can just double tap in that direction, or use another button while selecting, so like you would with the BFG and Unmaker and Doom Eternal. to be able to comfortably do that, so that there is an opportunity to really idealize both the Doom 3 experience as a whole, as well as the gamepad controls. Lastly, since I've been bringing it up every single game or every single version, is since you can toggle sprinting now with the thumbstick click, I think it'd be interesting to bring back the original Doom version or Xbox version, where you'd lose stamina proportionally to how much faster you are from normal walking speed, and that could really allow you to, one, free up a button if you have just a menu option to always sprint, because you'd only worry about losing stamina if you're pushing the stick fully, basically, but also so that you'd have a full granular depletion of your stamina based on how fast you're actually moving. Again, this is something that's really petty, just because most players are going to be pushing the stick fully, but it's a neat option that the original version had that could be reapplied here. So anyway, that's enough for me rambling. So unfortunately, the best current gamepad controls are on PC, but this current version console is the second best, so that's good. But if they wanted to, and hopefully they can, at some point in the future, these BFG edition versions could really be updated to give console players both an authentic Doom 3 experience, vanilla experience, but there's an opportunity to make an actual improvement to both, so that this can be the best of both worlds. So a player who gets these new versions of Doom 3 can experience a true vanilla experience, a true BFG experience, and better, so that you could have a level select maybe, or a Master Edition campaign with the best gamepad support possible. But that's about it. So yeah, thanks for watching, and have a good rest of your day.